Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming to this webinar. We're going to talk about the gut-brain connection. This is specifically geared to parents and parents who are working through health challenges with their kids, whether those are mental, emotional challenges, or those are physical challenges, hormonal challenges even, or if you're just a parent and you just want to know how to best support your kids. You need to understand their bodies. And this kind of threw me for a loop when I became a mother 15 years ago now. And I was like, I don't really know much about the developing body. I was a teacher at the time, and I didn't really know much about the developing body. I knew a lot about nutrition because I'd already studied nutrition. I knew a lot about education. I had a master's degree in education. So I knew about learning, and I knew about nutrition, but I didn't really know how to apply it to my kids. I didn't understand the child's body and development so that I could support it. And so that started me down this road of really trying to understand kids. And I wrote my book, Raising Resilience, to help parents understand their kids' bodies, and how to support their health. And then I created the Common Clear Kids program and the Resilience Roadmap program to coach parents through practical application of that stuff. And so really our goal here is to help you understand your kids, and the leverage points. One of the leverage points that you have as a parent is to understand this connection between the gut and the brain. And the context, or the reason why I'm pulling out the gut and the brain, is because what I really want you to understand is how messages flow through the body. The body is not a stagnant place. It is a very dynamic place. And messages are flowing through the body, circulating through the body. And it's almost like it's a different language, and we need to understand that language because our bodies are constantly communicating with us, sending us little messages about what it needs. And we need to understand that language or we miss the message. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk specifically about the gut-brain connection so that you start to understand how these messages are flowing through the body, and so that you can understand your kids better. So it was back when I was about, I think it must have been about 7 or 8 when I had my first taste of this connection. And I was a performer when I was a kid. I was really into music. I guess I was a musician, if you can call a 6-year-old a musician. I got really, really into music. And I don't remember choosing to get into music. I don't remember choosing to go to all my classes and do my music exams, but I did. And my instrument of choice back when I was 4 was the recorder. And, most kids are introduced to the recorder at some point, but few go on to really embrace it and take private lessons and do the Royal Conservatory exams and do the performances. So there I was as a little kid, and I would do these performances. I was quite good. And I would be the little kid in the chamber ensemble, with my little recorder being, the lead recorder, and with a chamber ensemble of adults with me. Sometimes I would be, delivering a concerto, a recorder concerto, which do exist, believe it or not, in front of big audiences, and a string quartet behind me. So there I was. It was no big deal for me as a kid. I would just get up, I would do it. People would say, "Oh, isn't that cute, little kid being so good at this thing?" And I was excited about that. And then somewhere, I think, maybe around age 8 or 9, I started to get nervous. I started to get those butterflies, right? Those like, oh, what if they don't like me? What if I mess up? Oh my gosh, what if I forget everything? Right? And I remember very distinctly this one time I was backstage. I was ready to do my big entrance, and my teacher was there. Her name was Sue, and she was amazing. And she was there, and I was like, I don't think I want to do this. I don't think I want to do this. My belly was flipping, right? And that's when she said, "Listen, you're a musician. You know how to breathe." And we sat there and we breathed together. And this famous quote came out of her mouth, which I didn't know was famous at the time. And there I was, this little kid. It's all right to have butterflies in your stomach. Just get them to fly in formation. And how do you do that? You do that by breathing. And so we breathed, and the butterflies calmed down. And that was the first connection that I had with, oh, okay, we can actually affect how we feel. We know now that the butterflies aren't actually in your stomach, they're in your intestine, and we know that they're not butterflies, they're actually bacteria, right? But the message is the same, which is that there is a connection. There are messages floating through our body that affect how we feel, and we can have an effect on them by what we do. In this case, it was by breathing, but we can extend that to how we sleep, how we think, how we eat, how we move our bodies, the quality of the water that we drink. All of these things affect the messages that are flowing through our body, and they have a very distinct influence on how we feel and how we function. So let's look at that in the context of the gut-brain connection. This is one of the key take-home things that I want you to understand about the gut-brain connection, is that it goes both ways. It's a bi-directional pathway. Messages are going from the brain to the gut and going from the gut to the brain. So I think, Hippocrates, who said all disease begins in the gut, sure, he was way before his time, right? He was actually living in a time when we understood that the body was actually an ecosystem, and we hadn't yet compartmentalized the body into all of its specific systems. It was a much more holistic time when we understood that the body was an ecosystem itself, but also that the body existed in a context, and that the environment affected the body and the body affected the environment. We've moved away from that, but Hippocrates in that context said all disease begins in the gut. And I think he was onto something, but I think he was only partly right. I think now what we know is that the gut and the brain actually work together to orchestrate all kinds of messages. And we know at this point that somewhere between 80 and 90% of the messages are flowing from the gut to the brain. So the vast majority of them, these messages starting in the gut and then affecting the nervous system. But then that leaves about 10 to 20% of those messages that are going from the brain to the gut. And this is really important because I think it really keeps kids stuck. If those of you who have kids who are anxious, for example, I work with a lot of kids that have anxiety. And sure enough, we often see symptoms in the mind, but we also see symptoms in the body, right? We see gut issues, we see constipation, we see irritable bowel. We can only get so far by affecting the gut if we don't calm the mind. So sometimes this goes beyond, being a hypochondriac or it's all in your head. These are clear messages of, oh my gosh, hold on, I'm stressed, coming from the nervous system, real messages that are shifting the microbiome to literally hold on, right? Literally hold on and reduce motility, right? Then you get constipation, or, oh my gosh, this is just too much, I just gotta dump, right? And causing diarrhea. And so then you get this, fluctuating between constipation and diarrhea as the nervous system is all discombobulated and it's like, okay, no, I can handle this. This is okay. And it's in a stress response. And then, oh my gosh, this is too much. And it's in a freeze response. And you get these shifts in the gut. So my point here is, if you've been working on the gut, if you have a child with anxiety, for example, and you've been working on the gut and you're just like hitting a plateau. I've seen this with a few cases that I've worked on. The one little girl in particular, they had done so much gut work. She had so many food sensitivities and they had done all the gut work. And usually with food sensitivities, you work on the gut, you work on the body's ability to receive the food. And then you can bring back the foods, and the gut knows what to do with them and digest them well. But we just, she just could not bring the foods back in. And this is a little girl who had experienced some trauma and some pain and some emotional angst, and was really holding it in her body, holding it in her shoulders. Her nervous system was definitely stressed out. And so we worked at that level. We worked to release the nervous system. And then slowly, her digestive system really started to come online, and we could start introducing some foods. So that's my take home here, is that the gut and the brain talk to each other in both directions, and we need to work from both directions in order to shift those messages that are coming from the gut, being processed by the brain, and then going back to the gut, which are messages of threat and stress, into messages of safety and calm, and we can work from both directions. So what we know, so this is what I meant. If the nervous system remains dysregulated, you're going to have a hard time fixing the gut. What do we know about this bidirectional communication? Well, we know so let's just start from the brain to the gut piece. We know that up to 50% of people with IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, have experienced trauma, and that's twice the rate of healthy controls. Isn't that interesting, right? So this is a trauma is an assault to the nervous system. It's a stress that was just too much. It was an assault to the nervous system. The nervous system has become very dysregulated, and that puts a person at a much higher risk of developing bowel symptoms. Okay, so that's one of the pieces. We know that early psychological trauma and maternal separation causes persistent mucosal barrier dysfunction. Now, this was in rats, but this is what, they took the babies away from the mothers, that the connection between biological mother and baby is really a cornerstone piece of what sets the nervous system up, what teaches the nervous system how to respond to stress. It's a very important bond, a very important attachment, and learning is going on there. And when they took the baby rats away from the mom, they saw changes in the mucosal barrier function, right? Isn't that interesting? So stress is something going on with the nervous system affecting the bowel. And yes, this does transfer into adults. This is a study I found 2019 where they took 13 to 18-year-olds and they followed them for 5 years. And what they did is they looked at kids in a normal biological birth and living with both parents. I don't know if it was both parents, but it was certainly the biological mother. And then they looked at kids who were in adoptive situations and with early separation, something to do with separation from maternal mom. And they followed them for 5 years, and they did find increased gastrointestinal symptoms, changes in the diversity of the microbiome, so actual shifts in the community of microbes that were living in their gut, and higher prefrontal cortex activity associated with anxiety. So again, you can see in this one, you've got an early stress, an early threat to the nervous system because of that maternal separation. You've got changes in the gut ecosystem, and then it loops back to affect the nervous system again and act in that frontal cortex activation. So you can see this stress cyclone happening in these kids. We know that in the first few weeks after traumatic brain injuries, most people have a reduced intestinal contractile activity. So again, we know that you have an assault to the nervous system, this time an actual physical assault in a traumatic brain injury, and that is affecting the intestinal barrier and the contractile activity in the gut. In fact, we know very, very shortly after you get a traumatic brain injury, they see increased permeability in the gut ecosystem. So it's very important if you have kids who get a concussion, for example, to give them some support for the intestine. Interesting, right? Very interesting. Okay, a few other things about what we know about how the brain affects the gut. We know that stress inhibits the contraction of the muscles in the gut. We know that stress and worry actually shift the microbiome, so shift those microbes. We know that cortisol, which is one of our main stress hormones, increases intestinal permeability. Sometimes you see this in long distance runners, for example. Aerobic activity is going to increase cortisol. And sometimes they get the runs, right? The runners get the runs. They get intestinal permeability. We know that zonulin, which is a protein that is partly, it controls the opening and the closing of the tight junctions in the intestinal lining, and also also does the same with the blood-brain barrier. So zonulin is a protein that they've isolated that sometimes is overproduced, but they know that if it affects the blood-brain barrier permeability and the gut permeability. So we're at the point now with the research where we understand that when there is gut permeability, there's also usually brain permeability, and vice versa, as I just discussed with the traumatic brain injury. Okay, what about the other direction? Well, the gut to the brain. So back to the IBS people, the irritable bowel syndrome people, it goes both ways, right? They found that the people with IBS, with anxiety were more likely to have trauma and IBS. The people who have IBS are 3 times more likely to experience depression than people without IBS. And for a long time, they were looking at this and they were saying, well, of course you're experiencing depression because you have IBS, right? You don't feel well, you don't feel good, you can't eat all the foods. Of course, that's going to turn into emotional distress and depression. But the research has unfolded in that they're actually looking, saying, no, it's not just because it's an uncomfortable experience. It's because there's irritation in the gastrointestinal system, which is sending signals to the central nervous system that trigger the mood changes. So again, we're back to this idea of messages flowing through the body. Now, in the way that we do things, right, always trying to isolate, they're looking at particular strains, usually so they can patent them, particular strains that improve mood. And so they have found some, not all. I mean, there are trillions and trillions of microbes, but they have found some that will specifically improve depression, anxiety, and stress, respectively. I will put a caveat in here. Don't go out and try to find, the one specific strain if your child has anxiety. It's more complicated than that. But I bring this up to just highlight that this is where the research is going. This was an interesting one, a small study back in 2018, only 32 people, but they looked at, what would happen if we actually give them supplements that contain a probiotic, a prebiotic, which is a fiber that feeds probiotic, and a psychobiotic, which is a plant extract that has been shown to affect mood. What if we give that to a group of people and then not to the other group of people? And they did find significant increases in their good bacteria and also improvement in their mood and their depression and their tension, their fatigue, their confusion, and their anger. So this coined the term psychobiotic, which is something that you eat that affects your mood. And we know a lot from autism research around what is going on in the gut and how that is affecting the nervous system. And this is just one that I pulled out. There are 2 main families or phyla in the gut, the Firmicutes and the Bacteroides. And the ratio of those very much affects the severity of autistic symptoms. It affects other things as well. Firmicutes, when Firmicutes are very high, we end up seeing more allergy. We end up seeing more autoimmune diseases. We end up seeing more carbohydrate cravings and imbalanced diets because that's what those Firmicutes want to eat. So this ratio can be one of those things you can look at to see whether the ecosystem is in the balance that is conducive to health or whether you're on the path towards more illness and disease. So very much the mood and the gut it's a bi-directional pathway. What we think affects the gut. So and not just what we think, but what's going on in the nervous system affects the gut, but also your microbes in the gut affect the nervous system. So all that to say, this is what I want you to understand. I want you to understand the flow of information through the body. You're starting to, right? I want you to understand how the gut and the brain influence each other, because I just showed you that it does, but I want you to understand how, because I think that's quite fascinating. And there are still quite a few people. I get questions all the time from parents of like, is this a real thing? Or is this just hype? Is this just a headline? No, this is a real thing. And it's a very powerful leverage point for you. I want you to understand the clues that your child's gut needs some support, because you can have gut problems without having gut symptoms. So I want you to be able to kind of self-assess to see whether there's work to do there. And then, of course, how to support a healthy gut-brain messaging. And for the recording, we won't have Q&A, but I do have a gift for you. I'll put it on the page here, kid-friendly foods for the gut. Okay, so the nervous system, I just want to break down a little bit of physiology for you, because like I say, like my core intention here is for you to understand your kids. I want you to understand their bodies. And gosh, if I had understood the nervous system when I was a new mom, it would have changed. It would have changed. It would have changed a lot. I would have changed what I had done, but it also would have changed how I felt about what was going on and what I understood about what was going on and how I would nourish my kids. And also as a teacher, my goodness, if I had understood the nervous system of children, I think I would have been a different teacher when I was in the classroom. So let's just quickly go through this. The central nervous system is the brain, this brain stem, which is at the back of the brain, and the spinal cord. Okay, that's our central nervous system. And then the point of the central nervous system is the brain is to create meaning out of all of its inputs, right? And then the spinal cord is the highway, the messages coming that are going to the brain to make some meaning out of what's going on, and then back to the rest of the body to make it do something. Then we have, and I wanted to pull this in here because isn't this an interesting picture of the developing baby? Can you see there? I don't know if my pointer will work, but you can see how the baby's brain, which is their central nervous system, just developing, right pressed up next to the spinal cord of mom, where the messages are flowing through her body. Right? Isn't that interesting? So as a fetus, even like inside mom's womb, we're already being trained by mom's nervous system about how we're going to react to and respond to the environment and stress. So if mom has a whole lot of threatening messages going through her, what's the baby going to learn? Right? Its nervous system is going to learn that messages of threat are normal. We need to take care of ourselves. We need to brace for threat. And those cycles of messages continue through the body. So this is one of the reasons why it's really important for us to take care of pregnant moms and make sure that they're safe and secure, because they're really training their offspring, and they have seen absolutely connections after baby is born. Even if baby is in a beautiful, loving, whole, nurturing environment, their nervous system is a little bit skewed towards perceiving threat and feeling unsafe. They have to do a lot of work to retrain that nervous system. It's possible, but they have to retrain it. Okay, then we have the peripheral nervous system, which is bringing sensory information from the environment into the body. And this is where I think we've really lost the plot a little bit, is that we often don't see our bodies in the context of our environment, but our bodies very much live in a context. We are constantly getting sensory input, which is traveling directly to our nervous system. So this is another way we want to send messages of safety and calm and security to our kids, is through their environment. And then we have the enteric nervous system, which is the nervous system in the gut, also called your child's second brain or your second brain. It lives in the gut. And interestingly, when you're in your mom's belly or uterus, I suppose, the enteric nervous system is actually created from the same tissue as the brain. And for the longest time, we knew that there was an enteric nervous system, but we kind of thought that its function was mostly just to modulate the digestive process and regulate the muscles and the contractions of the gut. But now we know that there are over 500 million neurons in the GI tract that receive signals and transmit them to the central nervous system for processing. So this is that 80 to 90% of messages coming from the gut to the brain. If there is a parasite, if there is an infection, if there are the wrong microbes in the gut, a lot of inflammation in the gut, that is going to be sending messages of stress right to the nervous system. And the nervous system doesn't know the difference between, a threat from like a car's about to run you over, or the threat from a certain type of microbe. The nervous system doesn't know the difference. A threat is a threat is a threat. It's going to respond the same way by activating the stress response. Now, the autonomic nervous system is a part of the peripheral nervous system. And I just want to highlight this because some of you have heard of the vagus nerve. And that is a really important, you need to understand the vagus nerve. It's a really important pathway through which messages are traveling. And it's part of this peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is, the autonomic nervous system is part of the peripheral nervous system that is not under conscious control. And there are two parts of it, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. This is our stress response. This is that we're constantly moving. If those of you who have seen my biology of behavior seminar, jesssherman.com/biology of behavior, you'll be familiar with these terms, sympathetic and parasympathetic. The sympathetic nervous system is our fight or flight. It is very much characterized by activation. The body is mobilizing. The body is mobilizing the senses. It's mobilizing, freeing glucose for energy. It's pulling out the adrenaline. Any perceived threat is going to stimulate this fight or flight response. Any perceived threat, right? And some kids, if they're skewed towards feeling threatened, they don't feel safe for whatever reason, they could have a hair trigger here. And these are the kids who are super explosive. They have sensory issues. They can't handle the bright lights. They don't like the tags on their clothes. They are often craving carbohydrates, right? To give them that energy. Temper tantrums, like beyond what is normal for development. These are often, even some kids who have, hyperactivity and ADHD-like behavior, even them, some of them are stuck in this sympathetic nervous system state, active all the time. And then of course they'll crash, right? Because you can't stay activated for that long. You run out of resources. And so you've got to shut off. The shut off is the parasympathetic nervous system, the shut off switch, right? This is known as our rest and digest system. Right? We need to be in a parasympathetic state in order to rest and digest, but it's also our fail-safe off switch for when we've been in sympathetic for too long. We will go into this conservation mode, which is not so healthy. See, there are two branches to the parasympathetic nervous system, and the pathways to understand here, this is the vagal nervous pathway, whereas the sympathetic nervous system mostly travels through the spine, the spinal cord. The parasympathetic nervous system runs through the vagus nerve. And this is, so you'll hear the vagus nerve called the main parasympathetic nerve of the body, that provides these calming messages, but also these shutdown messages are also going through the vagus nerve. So it's the longest nerve of the body. It goes from the base of the skull right down into the colon, and it innervates a lot of things along its way. The ventral vagal signals are coming, the ventral vagal part of the vagus nerve is the heart of social engagement, nonverbal communication. This is when we call a child in a calm, connected state, they are in the ventral vagal state, right? And we learn this as babies. We develop it through life. This is one of the reasons it's so important for babies to be mirroring calm and connected adults in their life. They need to be seeing those faces and getting those cues. Then we have the dorsal vagal signals. The dorsal vagal part of the nervous system is what is communicating with the gut. And this is the source of our freeze response, our off switch response to stress. You know, when things have just been too much, things have just you're overloaded, you're overwhelmed, and all you just kind of shut down, right? You just want to like go to bed, pull the covers up, and just like, I can't anymore, right? A lot of us have been there as parents, especially if we have a lot of kids or kids that are really hard on us and hard to manage. A lot of us, if you've been in a stressful situation for too long, eventually your dorsal vagal system is going to kick in and say, okay, conserve, pull back, shut down. This is a response to stress. And it happens in our kids as well. It happens right from babies. Actually, this is their shut off, right? If babies they're really good at driving their sympathetic stress response because they need a lot, right? They need to be cared for. They can't do anything for themselves. They don't have that ventral vagal calm anymore. They get they haven't developed that ventral vagal muscle. I'll call it a muscle, but that reflex yet. They do have this dorsal vagal shutoff though. So if they are in the sympathetic state for too long, they will then just go right into the freeze response to shut it all down if they don't get their needs met. As we grow, we develop this capacity to shut down. Okay, so here's the take home. That was kind of a lot, but this is what I want you to know. Messages flow through the body. They influence how we feel, how we behave, how we respond to stress, and how we respond to external stimuli. And so if those messages are overly threatening, you're going to see changes throughout the body, right? And I don't know if you can see this, but this is sort of shows you on the one side where it says parasympathetic, you can see how the parasympathetic messages flowing through the vagus nerve affect all these organs, right? So you can see shifts in all these organs. You'll see shifts in breathing. You'll see shifts in the eyes, in the pupils. You'll see shifts in heart rate. You'll see shifts even down into the liver. You're going to see shifts. You can't see them, but they're happening. And then on the other side, you see the sympathetic messages, which are flowing mostly through the spinal cord, and they also they also affect all of these organs as well. So I can't overemphasize how important these messages are to understanding your child. So I want to talk quickly about how the gut and the brain communicate so that we can find our leverage points, right? Because ultimately, I don't want you to just leave here with information. I want you to know what to do to start shifting messages, right? So we have to understand how they're communicating a little bit. I want to highlight two things there. There's the circulation and the immune system. And then I'm going to add one more that's actually not on here, which is that how microbes can actually directly interfere with neurotransmitters. But you'll hear this term, the gut-brain axis, and this is used to talk about how the gut and the brain are talking to each other. And you can see it's really complicated, like neural, endocrine, which is hormone, immune, metabolic mediators. Like there's all these chemicals involved in this, and I want to really try and simplify it for you. So the gut and the brain, one of the ways that they communicate with each other is through the immune system. The small intestine, interestingly, is one of the most highly saturated areas in terms of immune cells. And that makes sense, right? Because as food comes into the body, it's really the immune system that needs to decide whether that's friend or foe, right? And protect the body. So as food comes in, the immune system is constantly making little decisions about whether it's going to react to what's coming in. And substances so since there's a lot, so it makes sense that there's a lot of immune cells, immune activity there, but we don't want that immune system overactive. And what happens is that substances in the gut can activate this immune system, right? Bringing these messages of threat. And then the immune system then initiates inflammation and says, okay, there's a threat. We need to mobilize. We need to do something, right? That shouldn't be happening. But when things come into the body that initiate stress, initiate threat, the immune system does what it's supposed to do, which is, okay, inflammation, we're gonna fight this, right? So what comes into the body that can do this? Well, chemicals, pesticides, processed foods, too much sugar, foods that are not being digested well, right? When those things come in, the immune system is going to respond. Now, I wanted to point out some of the ways we can see whether this is happening, whether the immune activation in the gut is a leverage point for you, is an important. I mean, we know that it's important, but is this important for your child? This is a little piece I took from a wheat zoomer test, which is a blood test that tells you whether the body is reacting with a threatening response to wheat. And where this arrow is, this is looking at anti-LPS IgA. This is an immune antibody against something called lipopolysaccharides. Lipopolysaccharides, and then you can see that it's elevated in this little person. So what this is telling us, lipopolysaccharides are byproducts that are created from certain gut bacteria. We'll call them, as a blanket term, we'll just call them opportunistic bacteria, that when they're too strong, they create an overabundance of these lipopolysaccharides. And lipopolysaccharides are extremely inflammatory. So if they get pooped out, they'll cause local inflammation in the intestine, and then they'll get pooped out. But if they leak through the intestinal lining, if the intestinal lining is a little bit more permeable than it should be, and they leak through and they meet the immune system is going to have a freak out, right? Because these are highly inflammatory. This is a message of threat, right? And that's what's happening in this little person. This is telling us, okay, the immune system is reacting to the LPS, and there's too much LPS, because otherwise it wouldn't be reacting to it, right? So there's leakiness in the gut, there's intestinal permeability, and there's an overgrowth of LPS producing bacteria in the gut. So this is really important information, because that LPS then can activate the immune system. The immune system then initiates this message of threat. It's going to travel up to the brain. It's often going to cause neurological issues, things like anxiety, panic. That's what's going on with this girl. And in this case, actually, it was also causing a lot of physical pain. So this is one way you can know whether there's immune activation. This is another way we can look at this in conjunction. These proteobacteria, these are some of those LPS producers are in that family. And we want that to be in the 5% range, not in the 15% range. So there's an overgrowth of opportunistic bacteria here, and a lot of those are the LPS producers. This is another way. This one was taken from a gut zoomer test. This is another way you can know. So this one is from a GI map test. I think I mentioned these two families, the Bacteroidetes and the Firmicutes. A lot of the LPS producers are in that Firmicutes family. And so, we actually want to see this. We want to see this ratio. This ratio is way off. We want Bacteroidetes to be much higher, even a little bit higher than the Firmicutes, and we want them both to be kind of more in the center. So these are just clues to get a sense of, okay, is there potentially immune activation in the gut? When we see this Firmicutes, I think I mentioned this before, when we see this really high, this tends to give signals to the immune system that point it towards an over response, things like allergies and asthma and autoimmune diseases. And so if that correlates, then you found a leverage point, right? And what's the leverage point? What can you actually do about this? Well, those Bacteroidetes, they love phytonutrients. They love polyphenols. These are these psychobiotics, right? These plant chemicals that you're going to get in brightly colored, crisp, clear, local, as much as you can, fresh fruits and vegetables, brightly colored foods. And those Firmicutes, well, they love sugar and carbohydrates, right? So this is when shifting the diet becomes really helpful. And sometimes if you've got an older child who, let's say they're experiencing a lot of pain, or they're experiencing a lot of anxiety or brain fog, and they really just don't want to feel that way anymore, if you can show them this and explain to them, well, okay, we need to feed the Bacteroidetes, and we need to kind of stop enabling the Firmicutes. We're not going to starve them out, but we want to stop enabling them. Then we can bring things back into a bit of a balance, and you're going to feel better. All right. So that was the immune one. I wanted to say, gut microbes can directly affect neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are the chemicals in our bodies that affect how we feel and how we function. Things like dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine. Now, the research in mental health has gone way beyond what's called the monoamine theory, which is that, depression is low serotonin and ADHD is low dopamine. Like, it's way beyond that, and it's looking at other factors that are influencing brain chemistry, but they still do play a role. And I do find, when we support neurotransmitters, kids feel better. But here's an example. Clostridia, for example, in the gut, this is an opportunistic microbe. It's in all of us, but in some cases, it's allowed to proliferate. It's an opportunistic, right? And when it gets too strong, it can create elevations in dopamine. And it does that by in a couple of ways, but one of them is to interfere with the dopamine beta hydroxylase enzyme, that DBH enzyme, which is responsible for converting dopamine into norepinephrine so that it can be used and then flushed. So when you have elevations in Clostridia, you can get this elevation of dopamine and a deficiency in norepinephrine because the body's not converting it very well because of interference with this enzyme. And what does that look like? That can look like agitation, anger, frustration, like really low frustration tolerance can look like that. So that's, and then another way, 95% of the body's serotonin is produced and stored in the gut, and then certain microbes need to be present in order to release that serotonin. So again, it's serotonin is one of our most abundant calming neurotransmitters. A lot of it's created in the gut, some of it's created in the brain, and it needs to again send messages of calm and safety to the nervous system, and it needs certain microbes to be present in order to liberate it from where it's stored in the gut. So back to the Clostridia, I just wanted to point this out. This is taken from an organic acid test. It's a urine test that can show the presence of Clostridia. And so, it's not enough to just say, okay, there's Clostridia, we need to tackle the Clostridia. We need to correlate it with symptoms. So if you see, these elevations of 4-cresol, HPA, which means that the body the Clostridia has taken tyrosine, which is a building block for dopamine, and has converted it into these substances. And if those substances are coming out in the urine, it's a clue that possibly there is some Clostridia. And then if it correlates with symptoms of high dopamine, like I talked about earlier, then all of a sudden you have a leverage point that you can work with. Okay, the last pathway that I wanted to talk about how the gut and the brain talk to each other is through the circulation. So another example from Candida can actually produce these compounds, these kind of like alcohol compounds, which can suppress glutamate receptors that are involved in thinking and stimulation. And this is going to lead to things like brain fog and poor focus and poor memory, right? Some of the things that we associate with ADD and ADHD behavior. Right? If there's Candida in the gut, it's going to exacerbate this problem because these byproducts are being created from the Candida. Candida is a microbe, and it's going to circulate through the circulation system, and it's going to affect the glutamate receptors in the brain. Okay, so I've covered a lot, right? But this is the very first really important thing that I want you to leave here understanding, that the gut and the brain connect in a bi-directional way, with about 80 to 90% of the messages flowing from the gut to the brain through the vagus nerve, the circulation, and the immune pathways, but also that what happens in the gut can directly interfere with neurotransmitters. And that's going to affect how we feel. So this is some of the really granular pieces. I know those, a lot of you some of you like to zoom out and just be like, just tell me what to do. But I know a lot of you just really want the information, like, okay, tell me this is a real thing. What does the research know? I want you to know what the research knows. And this is just a fraction of it, you guys. I mean, I'm really trying to pull apart what I think is most actionable. But if messages of threat are flowing from the gut to the brain, or the messages are interfering with neurotransmitters that are meant to calm the brain, it's going to activate that sympathetic nervous system response and make a child feel anxious and moody and grumpy and angry and inattentive and combative and all of those things, right? But this is the other thing. If the nervous system is stuck in a stress state, the gut microbiome will remain dysregulated and vice versa. We have to work from both directions. Okay, the second important thing, I think I mentioned this, is that you can have gut problems without gut symptoms. So let's get into that for a second. How do you know if your child's gut, their second brain, needs some support? Maybe it's obvious, right? Maybe it's obvious and they actually have gut symptoms. Maybe it's not obvious. When I work with clients, I do a very extensive intake form. I'm asking them all kinds of questions, including what was happening at the start of this person's life, right? What was happening with mom? How much stress was she under, right? What was going on with the development of this little being, and what did that skew their stress response at all, right? Starting from there and moving right up. And I want to run a gut test on everybody. I want to see what's going on in that gut microbiome all the time, right? Regardless of whether there are gut symptoms, but certainly if there are gut symptoms. So here are some of the things that I see commonly and some of the questions that I ask about. There's obviously the gut symptoms themselves, so I'll skip over that. Those are a little bit more. Although I will say sometimes gut symptoms are hard to tell. If you've got a kid who is very private, being very private about their poop in a kid, that's a red flag to me, because most kids like talking about poop, right? So if they're being very private and very quiet about their stool, that's a bit of a red flag to be like, I wonder if they're actually pooing in the toilet. You know what I mean? Like, start to ask some questions. Sometimes it looks like, they're leaning forward on the toilet a lot, or they're just spending too much time there. Pressing on the abdomen, or in kids, you see this in autistic kids sometimes, or kids who are nonverbal, pressing their abdomen on hard objects. That's a gut sign. History can tell you whether there's likely to be dysfunction in the gut microbiome. If there were early like GERD medication for reflux, whether that was some kind of an acid blocker, that is a red flag for me. Miralax, any kind of laxative, those have been shown to really strip the microbiome. And in some cases, I mean, guys, the microbiome is a very dynamic place. And in some cases, a child will recover if it was only for a couple of days. But some kids have been on laxatives for years. And so constantly trying to strip the microbiome, it's hard to recover from that without a little bit of support and help. So that's a big red flag for me. Early issues with food, whether that's breast milk or formula or solid food, things like projectile vomiting or not wanting to eat, food aversions or things like that. Those are signs. Early trauma, early stress in the early days, this is always going to shift the microbiome. Right? Stress on the nervous system is going to make shifts in the microbiome. Sometimes the stress goes away and the body recalibrates and everything's okay, but sometimes it doesn't. C-sections, we know that babies that were born by C-section have different microbiota than kids who were born vaginally, and so there's a lot we can do to support that. This is one of those things. If I had known at the time, I would have done things differently, but I didn't know what I didn't know. And we moved forward and dealt with the consequences later, right? But kids who are born with C-section have a higher risk for asthma and allergies, eczema, these sorts of things, which are associated with imbalances in the microflora. Brain signals, I think I've talked about a lot of those. Is there anything going on in the mood and in the nervous system? It's worth looking at the gut because they're talking to each other, even if there are no gut symptoms. And then other things, I mean, the gut interacts with every body system. Every body system touches the digestive system at some point in some way. And so you can see symptoms anywhere: itchy skin, eczema, bedwetting, poor sleep, slow growth, picky eating. I don't have it on here, but hormone problems as your kids hit puberty, especially your girls. Painful periods, PMS, all of those things can come right back to changes, to issues in the gut ecosystem. So basically, I want to know what's going on in the gut, regardless of whatever symptom there is. Some things you can do at home. This is the Bristol stool chart. You can Google it and find it online just about anywhere. And you want the stool to be somewhere around type 3 or type 4 most of the time, right? It's a very dynamic ecosystem. So if it's in the 1s and 2s or the 6s and 7s once or twice, don't panic. Something is caused a little bit of stress, and something is moving through their body. And that's normal. But if it's consistent and it's persistent, and there are some of those other symptoms, it's time to take a look at what's going on in the gut. I mentioned these tests. These are some of my favorites. The organic acid test is a urine test. The GI map test is a stool analysis. The gut zoomer is also a stool analysis. And then the wheat zoomer is the one that I showed you with the anti-LPS, but it can also tell you, it also tells you a lot more about the state of the intestinal permeability. All right, so those are the first two things that I really want you to understand. I want you to understand that the gut-brain connection is bidirectional. Most of the messages coming from the gut to the brain, but some of those messages are also returning from the brain to the gut, which is what keeps kids in this vicious cycle of stress. It also means that you have two leverage points to help them. You can work from the gut to the brain, and you can work from the brain to the gut. And it's going to depend on your child and on your capacity and on your situation as to which makes most sense for you. I also want you to know that you can have gut problems without gut symptoms, right? And the last piece I really want you to know about is that information without action leads to overwhelm. I am always telling my coaching clients, the parents who come to work with me, I don't want you to just learn information. I want you to translate information into action, because otherwise you're just going to get paralyzed. And I think we do that a lot as parents. We learn. We'll go to summits, we go to webinars, we go to, information sessions, and we learn all kinds of things. And then we turn around, we're like, but what do I do? Like, what do I put on the table? My kid won't eat it. It's too expensive. Like, what do I do? I know what I should do, but I can't do it. And that's even worse, right? That's even worse. That means it's like, I know what I should do, but I can't actually do it. And then you just feel guilty, and then the cycles, and you get stressed, and then you have the negative messages flowing through your body. So every time you go to a webinar like this, or a seminar, or a summit, or anything like that where you're learning about your kids, I want you to take the information you're learning, and I want you to translate it into at least one action step that you can do today or tomorrow. Not one that you have to do major prep for and hire someone. No, I want you to figure out one or two things that you can actually do today or tomorrow. So let's talk about what some of those things can be. Food is your greatest ally in supporting positive gut-brain messaging. What goes on in your gut affects your brain. What goes on in your brain affects your gut. We need to make sure that what is coming into the gut, the food, is what the body expects. It's what the body has evolved to need and want, right? It's food that is going to provide the raw materials for neurotransmitters. It's bacteria that the body needs and wants and expects, right? So this is why, processed food and chemicals and environmental contaminants, this is really causing a problem in our gut ecosystem. I had pulled a couple of studies out I wanted to share with you. One of them was showing that the abundance of bacteria species, one of the things we know for sure is that variety and diversity is really key. And the diversity and the variety of bacteria can shift within a day of food reaching the gut. Isn't that interesting? That's how dynamic an environment we're talking about. And then the study went on to say that the microbiota will revert back to its original structure 2 days after diet is stopped. So that means if you go on a whole food, you can try this yourself and see how you feel. If you go on a whole food anti-inflammatory diet, which is going to be a lot of just real foods, fruits, vegetables, and meat and fish. That's pretty much what it boils down to. Then the gut microbiome is going to start shifting within a day. And then if you bring all the other foods back, it's going to revert back to how it was before within 2 days. I mean, you can't know this unless you actually test your stool, but this is what they're looking at in the studies. And I'm pointing out that it's just a very dynamic, it's a very responsive to the food that the gut is very responsive to the food that it receives. A highly processed diet, this is from the same study, can lead to permanent loss of bacteria, certain bacteria that are needed for the microbiome, and increased levels of endotoxin bacteria, endotoxin producing bacteria in the gut as well. And those are like example, the lipopolysaccharides I've talked about ages ago. Lipopolysaccharides are endotoxins, meaning they're created in the body. So the bacteria that produce the endotoxins will increase on a processed foods diet. So one of the things you can do right now is you can just go into your pantry, go into your fridge, and just assess. Like, no judgment. Do not judge yourself, because we do what we got to do. Don't judge yourself. Just go in with curiosity and think about, okay, how much processed food do I have here versus fresh food? How much real, solid, whole, in its natural form food versus something that has had to go through the machinery of processing? Just assess. Just assess. Right? Some people, when they do this, they notice, they're like, I'm not sure what a whole food is. Like, what do I do with crackers? What do I do with cheese? Like, are these whole foods or not? These are a version of processed food. It's gone through a processing process, right? So take cheese, for example. Cheese used to be a very natural product, right? We would take milk and we would turn it into cheese through fermentation. Well, that's a natural process. It's processing, but it's still in the evolutionary cycle of what our bodies are expecting, right? So that we have to take our processed foods that look like whole foods, like cheese, and then we have to ask, okay, was this made in a factory with a lot of, like, what's in it? What was put in it? Sometimes a lot of chemicals and enzymes and coagulants and things have been put into it. That is a processed food. Or is it from a small artisanal cheese company that actually went through the fermentation process, actually used good raw materials to create it? Okay, that's a processed food we can keep, naturally processed, right? Same thing goes with ferments, right? You can have a fermented food, that's a processed food, like a sauerkraut, for example. Then so you have to take that processed food and you have to look at it and to be like, was this actually, let's take pickles, for example. Was this actually fermented? Right? Was this actually gone through this natural fermentation process and fermented? Or is this a processed food that the cucumbers were just put in vinegar and processed that way? That's a processed food. So it's an interesting conversation to have with yourself. And this is something that you can do right away. What else do I have on here? Foods can modulate inflammation. We know that fish, for example, and fish oil tends to lower inflammation, while processed foods tend to fuel inflammation. Right? So that's another thing. You can just assess what kind of oils and fats are you using in your kitchen. And this is stuff that if you don't know any of this stuff, it's not your fault. We never learn this, right? We never learn this as parents. This is what I've made it my job to teach parents about, like, what fats should we be using? What fats are more inflammatory versus anti-inflammatory, right? What else? If foods are not digested well, they can become triggers for inflammation by activating the gut immune system. That is one way food affects gut-brain messaging. I spoke about this, but we talk about the the immune system pathways. This is why I take every family through, like, okay, how do we actually facilitate good digestion in our kids? This is not about taking a pill. This is about calming down. This is about making space for dinner time with family in a calm environment with real food. Like, that's something that is just, a lot of us have lost that in the shuffle of everyday life. But fact is, back to the nervous system, we can't digest our food unless we're in that ventral vagal sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous state. We can't digest our food. So if we're eating on the go and we're running and we're just grabbing a granola bar, you're getting nothing from that other than maybe some calories, right? So we need to facilitate digestion, because if foods are getting into the gut and they're not digested well, they're not pulled apart well by all the processes that are meant to happen in there, then they're going to activate that immune system in the gut, and that's going to cause the whole messaging problem. Messages of threat going up to the brain. And the brain is not going to differentiate between a message coming from the immune system saying, oh, you ate something that you shouldn't have eaten, or a threat coming to the nervous system, oh, someone's yelling at you and you need to yell back. A threat is a threat is a threat when it's processed by that central processing unit up there. All right, so food is your greatest ally. I don't want you to underestimate the power of food in helping you shift the messages inside your child. Now, I totally understand we're dealing with kids here and we're trying to affect the health of another person. It's hard enough to affect your own health, right? To improve your own health. It's doubly hard to influence the health of another person, specifically a child who, might be picky, might be angry, might have their own ideas about what they need. But the fact is, this is when we need to kind of zoom out and talk about creating a positive food environment and a nourishing environment in your home, which you do have control over. Some of us need to stop and take a few steps back because we're caught in this cyclone of stress of what life is right now. But I don't want you to underestimate the power of real whole quality food on the messages that flow between the gut and the brain. So if you have questions about that, if you don't know what that means, then that's an area you need some support with. It's something you need to learn about. You can learn about that from me through my programs, or you can learn about that wherever you want to learn about it. But I just caution you that, information without action leads to overwhelm. So whatever you learn about it, even things that I've said today, just take one or two pieces of it and apply it, turn it into action. And then you can learn more and turn that into action, and then more, and then turn that into action. You don't want to overload your system with information you don't know what to do with. Okay. So, that's why, just one last thing on that. That's why when I work with people, we work for 5 months at least, because we need to do some investigative work to be like, what the heck is going on in the body? Where are our leverage points to interrupt this messaging? And then we have to apply all of that. And sometimes that takes real small baby steps. It depends on the situation. All right. The last piece that I wanted to put in here, top strategies to support positive gut-brain messaging beyond just the food, what I talked about. The food is in quadrant number 4 there, feed the microbiome, right? We do need we need diversity, we need color, fermented foods are great, fiber is great, healthy fats, all the things that I've spoken about already. But then here are some other ways that we can support positive gut-brain messaging. I talked about the first one, calming the nervous system, right? So using amino acids is something that I use. These are nutritional supplements that affect the nervous system, affect our how we feel. I mean, that's a whole thing in and of itself. If you have my Calm and Clear Kids course, then there's instructions in there on how to pick the right amino acid, how to titrate it, some safety concerns and cautions, and how to use it safely with kids. It's also something that I walk through parents through in our resilience roadmap. And it's something you can also Google to find out more. There's more on my website about using amino acids as well, if you are a do-it-yourselfer. But that is one way that you will affect the gut-brain messaging, by calming the nervous system in order to send messages of safety to the gut ecosystem. I would love to see more tangible research on this. All I can share with you now is my clinical experience of using this with kids. Also the environment, right? Back to what I said at the very beginning, which was that our bodies live in context of their environment. If a child is living in a very stressed environment and moving all the time, they will get stuck in that cyclone of stress. So making sure that the environment around them is simplified. There's a lot of strong connection. They feel safe and secure. This can be a bumpy road if your child is already feeling really dysregulated, and then it's not going to happen overnight that you're just going to, dim the lights, calm the environment, and they're going to be fine. No, it's going to take a while, because the nervous system does not like to change. And when it's going in one direction and it's primed to live a certain way, it takes a lot of energy to shift that so that they can live in a different way and they can experience life in a different way. So, but as you calm the environment, so this, just assess for yourself, like, how many times a week do we actually sit down as a family and eat calmly, and it takes longer than 5 minutes to get through dinner, right? How can you facilitate an environment where it's how we're eating, but also just how we're living? Like, what's our lighting like in our home? Are there plants? Are there natural materials? Things that we have evolved with. That's something to consider. Sufficient sleep. Sleep affects the gut directly. It affects the nervous system, but it also affects the gut. Kids who don't sleep very well, they're often more picky. Their satiety and their hunger cues get messed up when they don't get enough sleep. So that's one place you could start with. And so see how sometimes you don't want to start with the food. Sometimes you have to start somewhere else, particularly if your child is very picky or very combative and just like closes their mouth and just like doesn't want anything to do with it. You can start to shift the environment around them. That's going to start shifting the messages inside them. And then you can slowly start to shift the foods. Gut busters. Gosh, you guys, glyphosate is really doing a number on our gut ecosystem, and it's been banned in a lot of places, but it's still the most common pesticide used in a lot of farming practices. And in some countries, you can still buy it over the counter. You can, as a weed killer, but it really does starve our microbes, and it does not affect our opportunistic microbes, but it does starve out our beneficial microbes. And so those opportunistic microbes have a chance to flourish. The things like the Clostridia and the Candida, and those are creating, those endotoxins, right? The LPS and the endotoxins, those are causing problems. Cleaning products. They've actually done quite a few studies on cleaning products. I had pulled one out, or a couple out, that postnatal exposure to household disinfectants affected the infant gut microbiota. And that led to a risk. They did this in the context of weight gain. So what they found is that when infants were exposed to household cleaners, toxic household cleaners, they had an increased chance of gaining weight later, right? And this probably has to do with that Firmicutes to Bacteroides ratio, because we often see increased Firmicutes leads to a predisposition to gaining weight. And the cleaners are knocking back the good guys that are supposed to hold the opportunistic ones in check. So this one was saying household cleaning products adversely affected the children's gut microbiome, irrespective of birth mode, intake of antibiotics, or breastfeeding. So just that one thing, just getting the chemicals out of the house. In the Resilience Roadmap, I have parents do a full house audit of the chemicals that are in their home. And sometimes they're in the oddest places, right? Of just the chemicals. What is this doing in my soap? And shifting over to more non-toxic cleaners, that can really help the microbiome. There was the regular use of disinfectants. We all are now, antimicrobials, antibacterial disinfectants, things that we're putting on our hands, is shifting the microbiome. And they looked at the opportunistic bacteria levels dropped with the protective levels. The protective bacteria levels dropped with daily use of disinfectants and regular use of household wipe products, right? Those wiping products, which we're all very familiar with now, right? This is affecting your child's gut microbiome. And so if they're exposed to a lot of this, probiotic-rich foods are really helpful, right? Avoiding the gut busters as much as you can, but, we do what we can. All right. And then the last piece here I have is supporting the immune system, right? Because it's ultimately the immune system that is interacting with the gut bacteria, and the two kind of work in concert. So what we see is that kids with impaired immune health also have a lot of dysfunction in their gut, which then feeds back into dysfunction in their immune system. So it's a message, it's a feedback loop. It's not that one necessarily is causing, it's a chicken and egg thing, right? It's like we need a strong immune system in order to have a healthy gut ecosystem, and we need a healthy gut ecosystem in order to have a strong immune system. So you can work both ways. But some ways you can support the immune system, not over hygienating, whether that's a word or not, I don't know, but the whole hygiene hypothesis of, we do need bugs and the right kind of bugs in our lives. Whole, good quality, colorful food, sufficient sleep, clean air, clean water, movement. Find the food sensitivities. If you have a hunch that your child has a food sensitivity or they're not digesting their food very well, then that's an area to explore that hunch, because a lot of kids they have food sensitivities because they're not digesting their food very well, and they're not just digesting their food very well because their microbiome is off and their nervous system is stressed. So they're caught in this vicious cycle feedback loop, and you have to find the way to break that. Okay. That brings us to the end, you guys. I'm conscious of the time, and I'm conscious of overloading you. This has been so much information coming at you, but I hope what you understand now is that there is a bi-directional pathway, several bi-directional pathways between the central nervous system in the brain and the rest of the body, specifically the enteric nervous system of the gut. And that we can shift the messages of threat by working on the gut ecosystem, by doing some of the things we talked about doing. We can also try to calm the nervous system, and that's going to affect the gut, right? And this is very simplified, right? You guys, this is easier said than done, but I want you to understand the concepts. I want you to understand that you can have gut symptoms. Things can be very off in the microbiome you can have gut problems. Things can be very off in the gut microbiome without having digestive symptoms. And sometimes in kids, there are digestive symptoms, but it's just really hard to know, right? You're not sure what you're even to look for. So because the digestive system really is, you can think of it like it's central to the body, and it interacts with every other body system. Anything that's going on in the body, whether it's physical pain, mental, emotional pain, skin problems, hormone problems, anything can stem back to issues going on in the microbiome. And then the third thing that I wanted you to understand is that for every piece of information that you learn about your child, translating that into one little actionable item is your key to staying out of overwhelm, right? We all just want to do right by our kids. Right? We just want to make good choices for them. We just want them to hear what we're saying. We want to be good teachers to them, which is easier said than done. Learning information is part of the recipe for that. And we are so ill-equipped to become parents when not only are we ill-equipped, like we don't learn this stuff, but also I think, we are in a new generation of parents. I'm in my 40s, so I'm talking to like anybody who's sort of maybe 55 and younger. We're in this era of parenting, which is uncharted territory. There are more stressors, there are more toxins, our immune systems are changing, there are more chemicals, there's more processed foods, there's more of those factors that are not very supportive of health around and available than ever before. And a lot of us are losing the connection that we need with our kids because life is just so busy, and there's all the things, right? Economic demands and school demands and all of the things. So what we teach really has to do with like a pulling back and a paring down and a getting back to basics, getting back to the core of what we know children need to develop, right? And to feel safe and secure. And unfortunately, as busyness has, escalated, and as things have become more convenient and more expensive, we've often lost sight of, it's hard to keep our sights on those core things that we know children need, right? Some of those things are right here, right? Whole, good quality food, sufficient restorative sleep, clean air, clean water, movement, play, outdoor time, right? Easier said than done. Easier said than done. I call those the 5 core needs for resilient health. That's in my methodology and in my model, always bringing back, and connection is the one that's not on there, the 5th. And a sense of purpose is all involved in there. Those 5 core needs for resilient health is what I use in my methodology and my resilience roadmap. These are the things everybody needs, and we just need to find places for them. And what I want you to take home from this session is that when those things are in place, they actually shift biochemistry. They actually shift what's going on in the microbiome and the nervous system. And I think I've shown you some of the ways that it does that. All right, you guys, that's it. There are lots of ways you can connect with me. I will throw a link to the kid-friendly foods for the gut just to get you going and so you have something tangible. JessSherman.com is where my home online is. And if you're interested in either of my coaching programs, JessSherman.com/resilience roadmap, that is how I coach parents through step-by-step how to figure out what's going on inside their kids, how to create their toolbox of tools that are unique to their child's biology. And then JessSherman.com/CCK is our Common Clear Kids program, which is really for parents who just want some starting points and are okay to just sort of walk through it on their own, just to figure out where to get started with all of this. And then on Instagram, you can find me at AskJessSherman.com. Or sorry, Ask Jess Sherman on Instagram. All right, that is it. Thank you so much for your attention. And your kids are really lucky to have you, that you stayed here until the end and that you're learning about their physiology, their biology, their needs, how to give them what they need. It speaks volumes about you as a parent. And I'm here to support you if you need more support. All right, bye for now.